Everyone, I'm Vivian Kong, and this is my project about temperature, greenhouse gas emission, and economic growth for different regions. So I'm just gonna keep the long story short, and there are three parts in my data analysis. Now, first part is about temperature and greenhouse gas emission. So we know that greenhouse gas emission causing the temperature increasing, while a lot of greenhouse gas emission causing the temperature increasing. And as I did that, I do find the correlation coefficient, which is pretty high, and that's going to be in my analysis. I show the entire and the detailed analysis for that. Now, in this case, now I find that there are a few bullet points I want to point out. And the first thing here is energy contributes the most greenhouse gas emission. And the second thing here is there are strong positive correlation between temperature and the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. And the mainly is correlated to the carbon dioxide emissions. The correlation coefficient, I believe, is around 0.7. And now, and also because of that, and I did run some residual plots and make sure they are normally distributed or approximately normally distributed, and I find my linear equation. Now, the x is emission of carbon dioxide in gigagram, and the y is the change of the temperature. So now in this case right here, I do find that if for 1 million gigagram of CO2, which is carbon dioxide, more released to the atmosphere, and the global average temperature will expected to increase by 0.12 Fahrenheit degree. So for my second part, I try to find the temperature and the GDP's relation or their correlation for 7 different regions, which are Europe, Africa, Asia, North America, South America, Caribbean, and Australia and New Zealand. And then, unfortunately, I couldn't really find any like a statistical significant correlation because, and then it makes sense to me because GDP doesn't only, there are so many things will affect the GDP, technology getting involved, and so that will increase the GDP. And there are so many reasons will causing the GDP higher or lower. It's not just only the temperature. So they are very complicated. So that's why it changed, and then it drew my attention to the agriculture. Agriculture is a part of economic sectors, and then also the agriculture will be, as we all know that it will be rely on temperature a little, maybe a lot, since our technology gets so advanced. So the agriculture may be not that correlated to the temperature. So now in my case, I change all of the regions. I still gonna doing the 7 regions, and in my 7 regions, I find that Europe, Caribbean, and the Africa, they have the positive correlation. But interestingly, Europe has the highest positive correlation, which is 0.25. But Africa and the Caribbean, they're like almost like 0, which makes sense, especially for Caribbean countries. Many countries in Caribbean in the Caribbean region are like hot countries. All year round, they are like pretty hot. So that's why in my part 3 right here, I changed them into 3 different sections. Now, for the first section is for those countries and the regions between 20 degrees south and further latitude and 20 degrees north. Now, between those this 20 and to 20 right here is most of countries are low income and food deficit countries because their countries are warmer than other places. So the agriculture doesn't really develop in those regions. So now in this case right here, and I do find that interestingly, let me just quickly go to here. Yeah, interestingly that I did a hypothesis testing for it. So the mean of those regions, the regions I'm looking at is Indonesia, Cambodia, Egypt, Madagascar, Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Congo, Ethiopia, and Mali. So for those countries right here, I using them as my sample, and I find that the alternative hypothesis is not equal to 0. I don't know if it's going to be increasing or decreasing, so that's why I just put it is now changing. But unfortunately, I find that the p-value right here, which is a 0.9405, that means it's statistically insignificant. We cannot reject the null hypothesis, which means their mean of correlation coefficient is 0. Now, there are a few reasons. I think there are a couple reasons behind this right here. Now, first thing right here is because they are low income and food deficit countries, so their agriculture doesn't develop that well in those countries. And also I show that in my project, and if you take a look at my project, you will see it. For especially for Caribbean and Africa, those places, their gross production value, especially for Caribbean, is almost 0. So they didn't really develop agriculture that much. So that's why, when we're talking about the temperature and agriculture, the correlation is really not that clear or obvious. But there's one thing, another reason for that is, even though their temperature doesn't affect or doesn't correlate the agriculture output, but they will still be the countries that are suffering the most, because since they need to satisfy their people's daily need, so they need to import those food. And the problem right here is, if other countries suffering from the warming, then they will not gonna get enough food. Even they get food, the supply and demand will shifting, so the price of the food will gonna be really, really high. So they probably cannot even afford their food. So that's why they are the one who got suffering the most. But we will see later on with my two other parts, and then they'll keep explaining why they're suffering the most. And now for my second part, I'm trying to find those countries who are higher than 45 degrees north and higher than 45 degrees south. Those countries are mostly, they are colder countries. So either they are they are not really heavily rely on the agriculture because they're cold weather. But in my case, right, so that's why when I do the hypothesis testing right here, now those are the countries I chose: China, Canada, US, Norway, Russia, Ireland, Japan, Argentina. So I find that my p-value is 0.8931, which is they not really get affected by the temperature increasing. But surprisingly, if you are looking at only those Europe countries, let me quickly go back to the Europe country. So for those Europe countries here, for those countries who are higher or above the 45 degree north, Ireland, Russia, France, Norway, and as you can see right here, their correlation is relatively high than other countries, and especially for Russia and Ireland. So which means when their country are colder country, so when the temperature increasing, it's actually cause their their environment is getting a little bit warmer. So in that case, it gave them an opportunity to develop their agriculture. So in this case, they do get some benefit for those colder countries. And now for the third part, which is agricultural producing countries, and mostly they are between 20 to 45 degrees north and 20 to 45 degrees south. Now for those countries, the temperature in general should be perfect for the agriculture developing, because it's not too hot, it's not too cold. And so, but for those countries, and I did a hypothesis testing, I chose 6 countries: China, Argentina, US, Brazil, Indonesia, and Mexico. And in those countries, most of them, they're negative correlated, and it's a relatively high, except the United States. Well, the reason why United States, it doesn't really get affected that much. Now, as my opinion, is because we are more technology advanced, which means even we get hurt by the warming, but we still can use the technology to make up for it in the short run. But just in the short run, probably not in the long run. So in my case right here, I do find the null hypothesis equals 0, but the alternative hypothesis, I expecting that's going to be less than 0. And here I find that my p-value is 0.005, which is statistically significant. Doesn't matter we're using the confidence the alpha, which is 5% or 1%. So in this case, we can conclude that for those agriculture producing countries are hurt by the warming. Now, the thing here is, since they are agriculture producing countries, so they definitely accept or satisfy their own people needs, and every day they can export food for other countries. So like for those low-income food deficit countries, will be heavily rely on those countries. Now, if the agriculture producing countries get hurt by the warming, then their output gonna be decreasing. So if their output decreasing, then that probably will cause the supply decreasing and demand will be increasing. So in that case, in the macroeconomics, then that will make those the food deficit countries suffer because they have to pay higher price, and then maybe they cannot afford it because their GDP already pretty low at the beginning. So in this case right here, the temperature increasing, as I can conclude, it does affect the agriculture for globally, but it just in the different ways, as I explained before. And thank you for listening.